Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 347 and we're covering Gaudium et Spes 70 to 71 on investments and property. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican. Yesterday we spoke about the principle of the universal destination of goods. Today we're continuing with Chapter 3, Economic and Social Life, and continuing Section 2, Certain Principles Governing Socioeconomic Life as a Whole. The summary of today is investment should help people, paragraph 70, and private property is important but not absolute, paragraph 71. So, paragraph 70 has no subparagraph, just one solid paragraph. It's on investments, and it notes that investments should promote jobs with decent salaries and not oppression. So it's basically investments should be a positive, not just, hey, exploitative. So let's read it. 70. Investments, for their part, must be directed towards procuring employment and sufficient income for people both now and in the future. Whoever makes decisions concerning its investments and the planning of the economy, whether they be individuals or groups of public authorities, are bound to keep these objectives in mind and to recognize their serious obligation of watching, on the one hand, the provision be made for the necessities required of a decent life both of individuals and of the whole community, and, on the other, of looking out for the future and establishing a right balance between the needs of present-day consumption, both individual and collective, and the demands of investing for the generation to come. They should also always bear in mind urgent needs of underdeveloped countries or regions. In monetary matters, they should beware of hurting the welfare of their own country or of other countries. Care should also be taken lest the economically weak countries unjustly suffer any loss from a change in the value of money. So this paragraph is really pointing out, or really has the underlying principle of investments, in principle, are good. But they can be used for good or for ill. Just like, my computer is good, but you can use this computer to hack things or, do other things that are immoral. The same thing with investments. So they need to be used for good, not just be good in themselves. And so the main thing they want to note for this is creating jobs, creating good jobs to help people out, right? And not to use it for oppressing poor countries where you just try and use it to exploit or take resources from the poor countries and leave them poor. And that's important. The notes right at the end, that whole idea of monetary systems, and that's important too, how we make sure that the value we give them is actually valuable and things like that. Like a lot of poor countries, they really struggle to pay debts because those debts are like nobody's going to take a debt in their currency because their currency can easily devalue and things like that. And on the other hand, it also notes that we need to take two things in mind. First of all, the present individual and community thing. And on the other hand, looking to the future. Okay, what can we look at in the future? What is there in the future? And there's that balance in the future that we don't destroy the world. We don't just, use soil until it's completely unusable or pollute the rivers till all the fish are dead or things like that. Obviously, with Benedict XVI, Pope Francis, etc., these ideas of environmentalism have been much developed from where they were in the 1960s. Laudato Si', for example, is a great development of this. And I think we kind of recognize this even long before that in the sense that if you go back to around the Industrial Revolution in England, they noticed crop rotation. So if they rotate between these series of crops, they would actually get a better yield overall. And that's just something of looking to the future, not just to the present, because you'll get a good yield several years in a row with the same crop. But if you use a crop rotation, you'll get a better yield over a 10, 20, 30 plus year period than if you just always use the same crop, which is what they realized right around the Industrial Revolution. This increased crop yield was one of the things that led to the Industrial Revolution in England, at least from what I understand. This is not an area I'm an expert on. So if there's other theories out there, that's one of them. I'm not an expert there. But anyways, let's move on to paragraph 71. And it instead has a lot of subparagraphs, 6 of them. The first 5 are rather short, and the last one is a little longer. And the first 5 are more general. The last one's kind of specific to a situation that we'll mention them, but it's not as big for us today and for where I think most of my listeners are located. So 71, we'll read A to C together. Private property is important for the common good autonomy. D and E, private property can be confiscated with compensation and should not become excessive. And then F, it would be ethical, not unethical. It would be ethical to break up large unjust landholdings in poorer countries. So let's begin with 71A to C. A, since property and other forms of private ownership of external goods contribute to the expression of the personality, and since, moreover, they furnish one an occasion to exercise its function in society and in the economy, it is important that the access of both individuals and communities to some ownership of external goods be fostered. B, private property or some ownership of external goods confers on everyone a sphere of wholly necessary for the autonomy of the person and the family, and it should be regarded as an extension of human freedom. Lastly, since it adds incentives for carrying on one's function and charge, it constitutes one of the conditions for civil liberties. C, the forms of such ownership or property are varied today and are becoming increasingly diversified. They remain, however, a cause of security not to be underestimated, in spite of social funds, rights, and services provided by society. This is true not only of material property, but also of material things such as professional capacities. To underlie this paragraph and to start it off, we need to remember that private property is a right. We have a right to private property. This is an absolute right, and we'll get into the details throughout this paragraph of certain limitation on it, but it is a right. And it is correlative or in tension with the right we talked about yesterday, the universal destination of goods, because we think, okay, everyone has their things, and I have my thing. Everything of the world is for everyone, but these things are mine. That is a kind of tension. In other aspects, it does have a good function in the sense that we are going to take care of the things that are ours, that are, I'm going to take care of my clothes better than like communal clothes or communal spaces, and things like that. And the fact that these are my clothes and those are your clothes makes sure everyone in the society has clothes, or everyone in the society has a bedroom to live in, to sleep in every night. Otherwise, it's like, a bunch of people went to something and then all the rooms nearby are all taken. So somebody is struggling to find a room for that night because they don't have their own private room set aside. So that's the kind of idea we're talking about. We're talking about the universal destination of goods versus private property. Now here, the rest of this paragraph is going to talk about private property, both in the good and in limitations. It starts with the good here, talking about how it helps develop personality, it helps develop autonomy, it allows us to function in society and in the economy. For example, even someone like myself, my salary goes straight to my community, but like the fact that I have a car my car belongs to my community, but it's set aside for my use, which I'm freely lending out to other members of the community when I don't need it. But, I live at my community's house and I teach in a seminary that's 30 minutes away from my community's house, 30 minutes by car. And there really isn't public transit here. If I did not have a car that was to my access, I could not live and work where I do. It just wouldn't be possible. And that's the kind of reality we're talking about. And we must ensure both individual and communal ownership as a possibility. Communal ownership here doesn't just refer to the government, which we might think of first of all, but also refers to private associations. Private associations can be things like a union, a labor union. You'll often see like the union hall near the big plant or something like that. You will see clubs like a tennis club or social club type thing. And even things like churches, like the fact that St. Michael's Parish owns the church and the land and the parking lot and the gym that the CIO basketball plays in and things like that. That's good. And that should be allowed. And private property provides an incentive for working hard, working smart, developing things. Because, for example, if someone is an inventor and they realize, oh, if I'm able to hold on to my private intellectual property, I can make a lot of money. They're motivated to be an inventor, and they can, spend more time working on it, things like that, knowing that they will have what their family needs based on that. Or someone who's a plumber and knows, okay, like if I fix all these people's houses, I'll make this money and then I'll have, a nice place to live. It motivates them to put in those hours and get over the bad smell that you have to deal with being a plumber. Things like that. And here we're going to have varied ownership structures. Now, most of us are familiar with the kind of private property system, Canada, US, UK, which is pretty similar, but they're not always exactly the same. I know, for example, my hometown, Calgary, right beside Calgary, there is a native reservation, the Tsuut'ina Nation. And non-natives can't own land on the reservation. And I think the reservation owns all the land, or there might be something of natives there. I'm not 100% sure. But the reservation also put some properties where there's, because the ring road of the city goes around through it, where, stores and restaurants and things like that can be, or where a few houses can be. And they don't own that land. They have a 99-year lease. Now, presumably they'll renew the lease in 99 years, most likely, or we'll figure things out then, because his lease only started out 10, 20 years ago at longest, I think. So, but those kind of things. And so this is important to think about when you think about private property, that not every single culture is going to have the exact same forms, even though we are very familiar with one set of forms. Now, moving on to D&E, it talks about how private property can be confiscated with compensation and should not be excessive. So let's read it. 71D. The right of private ownership, however, is not opposed to the right inherent in various forms of public property. Goods can be transferred to the public domain only by the competent authority, according to the demands within the limits of the common good and with fair compensation. Furthermore, it is the right of public authority to prevent anyone from abusing his private property to the detriment of the common good. E. By its very nature, private property has a social quality, which is based on the law of the common destination of earthly goods. If this social quality is overlooked, property often becomes an occasion of passionate desires for wealth and serious disturbances, so that a pretext is given to the attackers for calling the right itself into question. So along with private property, what this number is pointing out is that the church supports public property. It's good that we have roads that are owned by everybody. It's good that we have parks that are owned by everybody and things like that. And if the government goes to take private property, which sometimes is necessary, say they want to build a road or something like that, and there's one house sitting in the middle of building this road, they can confiscate it. But to confiscate, they have to give proper remuneration. They have to give that person, those type of things. The remuneration, the amount that's fair value for their property. And then also we need to prevent abuse. For example, they can confiscate money obtained by selling drugs or things like that. Now, E here is talking about the social quality of wealth. Then wealth needs to serve a social function. If we ignore this, we end up with an overconcentration of wealth, overconcentration of property, and then there are dangers for those who don't want private property, want to deny it, to push for to push for the elimination of the right, or to push for violence against the property owners. And that is a problem. That's why the state should ensure that we have limitations on private property in that sense. Now, moving on to F. F talks about if it would be ethical to break up large unjust land holdings in poorer countries. This was much more an issue in the 1960s than I think it is now. And I think it's an issue that was in certain underdeveloped countries, not so much in the countries that I think most of my listeners are in, like Canada, US, etc. Let's read it. 71F. In many underdeveloped regions, there are large or even extensive rural estates which are only slightly cultivated or lie completely idle for the sake of profit, while the majority of people either are without land or have very small land fields. And, on the other hand, it is evidently urgent to increase the productivity of the fields. Not infrequently, those who are hired to work for the landowners, or who till a portion of the land as tenants, receive a wage or income unworthy of a human being, lack decent housing, and are exploited by middlemen. Deprived of all security, they live under such personal servitude that almost every opportunity of acting on their own initiative and responsibility is denied to them, and all advancement in human culture and all sharing in social and political life is forbidden to them. According to the different cases, therefore, reforms are necessary, that income may grow, working conditions should be improved, security and employment increased, and an incentive to working on one's own initiative given. Indeed, insufficiently cultivated estates should be distributed to those who can make these lands fruitful. In this case, the necessary things and means, especially educational aids and the right faculties for cooperative organization, must be supplied. Whenever, nevertheless, the common good requires expropriation, compensation must be reckoned in equity after all the circumstances have been weighed. So here, as I noted, this is a specific issue that was really in the 1960s. It was kind of the leftover remnants of colonialism many times. That also can lead us to question how just the acquisition of such lands were. This is beyond what is mentioned here, but that's kind of implied, I think, in the context of lots of these large land holdings in places like Africa and Asia at the time, or even South America. So they have these large unused land, and it's keeping other people from growing enough to survive, growing enough in their fields to survive. And there's farmers who are underpaid to the point of being unable to sustain families. And the Council Fathers note that in such a situation, it's acceptable to redistribute unused estates, unused land, unjust estates. And it talks about reimbursement, but notes that would be a little bit varied. As this is not a huge issue today, I'm just going to leave it there. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly to the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow we'll continue with the next paragraph of Gaudium Spes, paragraph 72, on Christians' help with economics. It should be a pretty short episode to make up for today's long episode. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, like playlists and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.
Amen.